We're not saying that we don't understand that cars are an essential part of how people get around, or that even there needs to be places for them. What we're saying is we need to better manage them in order to get to that place that we all say that we want. No world-class city, if you think about going to New York or Paris or London or Budapest or wherever, you're not going there because you know that they have easily accessible parking. You're going there because you want to go have an experience of that place.
That's Francis Grunow from Detroiters for Parking Reform. The Motor City. That's a nickname for our town that's known the world over. After all, we put the world on wheels. But what if the same industry that gave us economic strength also, in a way, took away the vitality of the city? Detroiters for Parking Reform says there's too much surface parking around greater downtown Detroit. They point to statistics like 40% of downtown Detroit is devoted to storing cars, hurting Detroit's resurgence. We'll get into that with Grunow and talk about lessons learned from being part of a Neighborhood Advisory Council in the shadow of Little Caesars Arena. I'm Jairus Days, and this is your Daily Detroit for Monday, September 23rd, 2019. But first, thanks to two groups for making this show possible. Thanks to Ryan and the fine folks at Repurpose. That's where you can get hired by Detroit's best startups and companies. Repurpose connects top talent like you, yes you, with purpose-driven companies based on values, experience, and culture fit. Join their talent community at repurpose.co. And also to our members who help make the show possible, you can become one of those great folks at patreon.com/dailydetroit. Thank you for helping push Detroit's conversation forward. Joining me at the Fisher Building Studios, Francis Grunow. He is a man who thinks Detroit needs less parking. Welcome to Daily Detroit, Francis.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. This space is amazing.
Thank you.
And it's just a few blocks away.
So it's the Motor City.
Yeah.
It might seem counterintuitive to people that Detroit needs less parking or parking reform. How did you come to this one?
Well, parking is one of the wonkiest city topics I think that you could probably get into. I do believe that Detroit needs less parking, but probably even more, I believe Detroit needs its current parking to be better managed. And I think that would work better for everyone if it was better managed as a resource, as a finite resource. Even if the whole of the city was a big parking lot, you'd have, at the end of the day, only so many spaces that you could fit in that. So the parking that we do have, we believe, should be better managed so that people understand how it works a little better and how to access it more easily.
One of the trends that's been interesting doing the show the last year, I actually have had the vice president for parking of Bedrock on this show.
Oh, yeah.
And then last week I was covering an event at Greektown where they're literally working to eliminate more surface parking lots.
Yeah.
And that is something I think to a lot of visitors to the city seems kind of crazy, right? We're so used to driving in and out, and we could talk about transit, but the reality is that across most of the region, transit isn't where it needs to be.
Right.
So what can being smarter about parking bring to the table? And I think specifically about places like the District Detroit,
Right.
which has replaced a lot of buildings for parking lots. And if you walk down Cass Avenue, no one can say that it's full of people on the regular.
Right. No, the district as one stellar example of putting lots of parking everywhere is that what you end with is an event center that has a cycle of activity. It's on or it's off, and everything else around it, especially when that off is desolate. There's nothing going on at all. And so when District Detroit was coming online, we understand that there's a need for parking for a facility like that. But to rely so heavily on surface parking, especially where there literally is only that use on that parcel, and it is highly inefficient for cars especially, you're losing out on what makes places special and what makes cities special. And what makes them special is that there's a lot of different stuff as you go from block to block, lot to lot, street to street. And parking is a real killer of that urban vitality.
I don't think people sometimes think about that when they come down to see a Lions game or a Red Wings game or a Pistons or a Tigers game, because talking to business owners on the ground, it's really clear to me that when you've got those parking lots and you don't have like nice, interesting ways for people to walk and connect to different things, they just go straight back to their car.
Right. There's no reason to stay. Absolutely. We want to build, at least we say we want to build a place that's world class, that has amenities for people, that has different options for people to live, work, and play. We've all heard that term used over and over and over again. And so how do you do that? Well, one way to do that is to really think about how we're giving so much of our space away for automobiles. And in Detroit, the home of the automobile, a motor city, it's something that, I think we need to get over ourselves a little bit. We're not saying that we don't understand that cars are an essential part of how people get around, or that even, there needs to be places for them. What we're saying is we need to better manage them in order to get to that place that we all say that we want. No world-class city, if you think about, going to New York or Paris or London or Budapest or wherever, you're not going there because you know that they have easily accessible parking. You're going there because you want to go have an experience of that place, and you want to be able to engage in that place and ideally walk around that place. And we need to think about how we're doing that currently so that we're building towards that place we all say that we want.
One of the themes that I think about on a regular basis is that so often in the regional conversation, the development conversation, I think it's important that folks realize that Detroiters deserve better, right? These things, a lot of things that happen in development here are done from a perspective, in my opinion, that is, well, we should just be thankful for whatever we get. And we should, right. And I see online all the time, people say, well, you get the finger wag. I just know I'm doing a finger wag right now because
it's real.
I can see it through the Facebook where it's, you should be thankful for anything that happens. And you should, basically you should beg and grovel for anything that happens. And to me, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair to residents. And I think any project that we do needs to think about residents and building the city first. Yes, serve the visitors that are coming here. We have a unique and wonderful asset in 4 sports teams who, are here and people visit, and that's great, and drop off money. Well, nobody goes to Tigers games anymore, but
it's another story.
That's a whole nother story. Yeah. But if we think about development and we think about making Detroit a world-class city, we're known as the Paris of the Midwest. How do we make more of Paris and less of the bad parts?
Right. That's a great question. And I think it's not just about parking, but parking is one part of it. We came out recently with a new initiative called Detroiters for Parking Reform, with this basic idea that we need to do something to address parking as a scourge. We call it that. We're using some language that hopefully gets people's attention, because as we started, this is not something that people generally think a whole lot about. But the fact of the matter is we have more parking now than we've ever had in the history of the city of Detroit. And that's with half as many people as it was at its high point, and only about a third of the commercial activity. So we are not doing a good job of managing this resource. 40% or so of downtown is relegated to car use, and that is highly inefficient. The folks at Bedrock are actually really understanding this as a long-term business model problem for their investments downtown. They can't have so much space devoted to parking, which really doesn't, generate that much income in terms of density, building up office buildings.
Well, I think it comes down to highest and best use, right? And
Exactly.
I think for so long, so many developers thought, well, we have to include so much parking. And then another thing I think a lot of Detroit watchers don't realize, there's a lot of parking requirements that are baked into city code that are insane.
Exactly. That's a big, big point. We know that these numbers that you speak of are taken as the Bible of planning for the future, when in fact they're based on these sort of specious accounts from all over the country, and they're kind of put into a number cruncher and churned out so that you get, for every fast food restaurant that you build, you need X number of spaces, or for every funeral home you need Y number of spaces, and it really doesn't. It's not relevant to how we actually live or say that we want to live.
Well, and it doesn't give context. So I've lived in a few different city neighborhoods, whether it's on the east side, whether it's University District. Now I'm in the north end. Those neighborhoods are all different and have different needs. And one of the things that can be kind of maddening about the city and just like like if you've been here a while complaint is that there seems to be often a broad brush applied across the city when in fact like zoning and signage and all that other stuff is going to work different in the greater downtown than it should say in the University District, which has a feel that's, I mean, if you're up in University or Palmer Woods, that's going to, I mean, if you drop someone there, you wouldn't know you're not in Grosse Pointe.
Right. Yeah. So I think we need to look at how we do the zoning. And actually, this is well timed because the city is going through a big zoning rewrite process right now. And in our position paper, we're calling for a moratorium basically on the creation of new commercial surface parking lots in downtown, midtown, and New Center until a few things can happen. One of them is this look at zoning and the requirements of parking for every type of use. And there's a growing number of places that are basically eliminating the minimum parking requirement. And that's one of the things that we're calling for that the zoning do. And actually, we've heard that the early recommendation suggests that that is what the city should adopt. So that would take away the minimum parking requirement for any new use. And what that allows for is for communities to really figure out how to right-size themselves. It's not saying that you can't have parking. It's saying that you're not required to have X, Y, or Z parking. And it really does incentivize communities to figure out how to manage it, how to share it, how to use it during the day and during the night so that you don't have this condition where, oh, well, this lot is used for this during one part of the week and then it's not, and then it's inaccessible the rest of the time. It really is counterproductive to so many of the things that we're saying that we want to see in Detroit long term.
So let's talk about solutions then going forward. Now, I know that there's a lot of our pro-transit listeners who will be like, more buses. And that's of course something that would help, but
right.
That's also that's something the city can't control on its own. One of the things that especially in a regional context, because a lot of the people coming downtown are not from the city. They're from the suburbs, the outer suburbs. If you live in Lake Orion, you got to drive. That's just the reality. So knowing that we've got these cars coming down, one of the things that I have talked to a few business owners about doing these interviews is the idea that why isn't there more centralized parking? So if you think about in Ann Arbor or other cities where there's actually like city garages that actually smartly take up a dedicated amount of space, and then all of the other businesses benefit from having that centralized place. That happens in a lot of other areas. It doesn't seem like we really have that at scale here.
We have a municipal parking department that could do a lot better, and one of the recommendations is that the department be empowered to think like that more often, not only in the core area, downtown, midtown, and New Center, but also in neighborhoods where there is a commercial strip in along Livernois, for example, or in Southwest where there's a business improvement district. One of the interesting ways to get local businesses, and that would be sort of the neighborhood, sort of Main Street that we're talking about, to get them into the idea of parking reform is to say those street parking spaces, so street side spaces, usually when you deposit the money or you'd use your smart app or whatever to pay for those, it goes to, the city's general fund, and you might not ever see it again. But other places actually figure out ways to get a percentage of that or even all of that where it's spent to come back to a local business improvement district or another organization whose mission is to help businesses in that area for streetscape improvement, for incentivizing people to take buses or to ride their bikes there or do other things that help alleviate this issue so that they can actually see a return on their investment for people parking. And it gives people actually, when they do park, a sense that they're supporting the neighborhood too. So that's one of the things that we talk about as a solution. And we have the technology for it now. And a lot of these things were theoretical just 10 or 15 years ago. But we have these ways of tracking parking availability, of scaling how much parking costs depending on how much market need there is. So it's a very exciting time actually for parking management.
Well, I love the excitement around such a frankly wonky and nerdy topic. I think that's great. One of the words that I keyed in on what you're just saying is empowered. Why did you use that word empowered when it comes to these parking things? Because to me, that says they don't have the power to do it now.
I think that we don't think about it as a way to empower better behavior. What we're really talking about is giving people options and letting them understand that there's connectivity between their decisions and how their city looks. And if you can give people a sense of power over making a better decision, I think that is one of the ways that we can get to a better place long term. So yeah, I think the local neighborhood business improvement district that is able to capture some of the funds from either there or what's downtown. If all of the money collected downtown was distributed on a pro rata basis to neighborhoods, that would be another way to do it. So I think that you can begin to make connections for people about how their behavior impacts either negatively or potentially positively the built environment. And I think that's potentially very powerful.
So I would be remiss having you here and not asking you a little bit about the most recent thing that you just wrapped up, which is your Neighborhood Advisory Council around the area that is the District Detroit.
Right.
What are some of and to give people kind of a reset, it was something that I believe was put together and pushed through by Councilmember Castaneda Lopez.
That's correct.
To kind of use the word empower residents to have a voice at the table. Unfortunately, it wasn't given legal teeth to the extent that maybe it could have to do more. What are some of the things that you learned from that? And what are some of your takeaways from that whole experience?
Wow. That was a big project, obviously, and it was a long time. It was 5 years we've been doing this, and we've learned a lot. It's been frustrating. We wanted to see different outcomes. Obviously, the fact that so much of what had been promised as a sort of neighborhood vision or set of neighborhood visions, really haven't come to pass. And I'll say too that to be fair to Ilitch's or whoever would promise something on the scale of we're going to deliver you a neighborhood. It doesn't happen that way, and it takes years and years for places to organically evolve properly, sustainably over time. The real tragedy that we've seen so far is that the arena is built. It was open on time, a little ahead of schedule, and they didn't. They spared no expense. They spared none of our expense as citizens who paid taxes, but they made that happen. And what has been really sad to see is that the promises for historic rehabilitations of buildings like the Eddystone, Alhambra, American,
those renderings were beautiful.
Yeah,
that for the most part, it's all been in fact, for the whole part, it's all been rendering.
Yeah, so to not have that parallel track of at least progress over time, so that even if a project was a little bit late in coming, that you could see that they were actively working towards that end, so that those buildings that are really unfortunately define District Detroit by their blight would be coming online to set a stage for the future build out of the neighborhood vision. That's the real tragedy, because it shows where, in my mind, it shows where priorities really lay in that family's mind and wallets. And I think it really calls into question, for future promises, we shouldn't forget, before they promise something else, we shouldn't forget all of the other things that they said that they would do.
One thing that's maddening from a community conversation point of view, and this was something that was brought up on a previous episode by PR expert Matt Friedman, was it's been the sheer lack of communication. Because at the end of the day, like the Gilbert crew has had projects delayed. Their Hudson's Tower just got chopped in half, but we know about it.
Right.
And it's something where no one expects everything to go exactly as planned, but the lack of community conversation is something that I think we really need to put a pin in and say, is this fair and is this okay? Now, are there things, because development is going to continue to happen in various ways across the city. what are things that other groups can learn from your experience specifically that we need to be mindful of so that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, thanks for re-asking it, because I think I struggle with like, what are good outcomes? What are things? Yes, keep a close eye on what is promised. Keep a close eye on what public incentives are involved and what potential community involvements there can be. So that means go to your city planning commission meeting. Figure out who your district council person is. Go to city council. Find out where in those committees these kinds of decisions get made. Unfortunately, I mean, it's not necessarily unfortunate, but I guess what I'm saying is there's work involved in keeping on task these projects and making sure that there are good community outcomes. And so people really need to understand how city approval processes work. And we're getting better at that. And I'm very happy to, share whatever it is I know about that, because you can make a difference in terms of an outcome. When we were fighting over the Cass Henry Historic District, which is where there's still some naturally affordable housing in the district that's on the south side of the district, just next to the freeway, there's a bunch of apartments, many of which have been emptied out and are vacant, but 2 which remain occupied. The Illiches put on a full court press to prevent that historic district from happening. In fact, we were pretty sure that we would lose the council votes. We came out in force as a neighborhood, as a bunch of affordable housing proponents, and as the NAC, and we turned that tide and actually got that district approved, which at least in terms of the Illiches not being able to knock those buildings down is now a victory. So keep your elected officials honest and be smart about how you engage the process. You may be able to get better outcomes.
All right. So looking forward, how can people get involved in your parking reform project?
You can go to www.reformdetroitparking.org. So it's reformdetroitparking, all one word, .org. And then we're also on Facebook, Detroiters for Parking Reform, and Twitter, @Detroit Parking. And we'd love to have you involved as we continue to push for a moratorium on surface parking in downtown.
Francis Grunow, thank you for coming to Daily Detroit.
Thank you, Daily Detroit, for having me. This is great. I appreciate it.
Here are a couple other things you should know around Detroit today. The world-renowned Heidelberg Project has suffered another fire, this time at their U-House. This isn't the first fire for the project. If you remember, back in 2015, there was a rash of them in a row. 2 points of note today, though. First, there's a person in custody, according to the Detroit News, a 49-year-old woman. Second, it looks like the city had multiple fire hydrants that didn't work nearby, which is, well, concerning to say the least. Started in 1986, the Heidelberg Project, located at Mount Elliott and, well, Heidelberg Street in Detroit, is one of Detroit's most visited tourist attractions. And over the weekend, Motown founder Berry Gordy announced his retirement. He also helped break ground on Motown Next, an expansion to the Motown Museum for educational and community programming. It also marked the halfway point of the $50 million funding raise for the expanded complex, honoring the legendary sounds of Detroit. All right, that's all for today. Thanks for listening to Your Daily Detroit. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe. It's totally free in your podcast app of choice, and don't miss another episode. For the whole team that brings this show to you, Sven Gustafson, Cheyenne Oserini, Randy Walker, Devin O'Reilly, and Fletcher Sharp, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.